Ulen and Ablak Gemara. Today, Thursday's daf is daf Kuf Yutes. We are still learning the laws of Tumah V'Tada, and this will go on for still for a while. And the last thing we learned about was the machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. We learned about two concepts extending beyond the food that is tamei. Or the Nevela is tamei. We have the concept of the yad, which is a handle. It's not part of the food, but it's a handle. It moves the food about. There, the din is that the tumah is brought in through the handle. The handle becomes touches something tumah, brings the tumah to the food, or the food is tumah, it'll pass it out. It's machnis and moitzi, but you cannot use that to calculate the amount, the shear for to kabbalah's tumah, or to transmit tumah to a beya. However, a shemer, that which is protects, like the hide of an animal, as long as it's right opposite the meat, then the shemer, on the other hand, not only is a machnis a moitzi, which we learned is a kalochemer from Yad, but furthermore, you can use that to combine, add that to the flesh, and together you'll have a bay. Anything that's a shemer, or to the fruit itself, you'll have the full size of bay. You can count the shemer. So shemer obviously is far more stringent than the yad, but there's a leniency by shemer that a yad, the bone is sticking out, the tumor will pass to the meat. But by a shemer, it's only if the meat is corresponding, is touching the actual, let's say, hide of the animal. Anyway, then we had a machlekes Rav and Shmuel about the quantity of the yad. So let's say according to Shittas Rashi, you need a total beya to receive tumah, but it doesn't have to be. You can have a few food items together that are tumah, and then they're all touching each other, and you can count them all together as a beya. And Rav says when it comes to the yad, when do we say the yad has a din of a yad? Only there's a minimum of a kazayis of the particular food that's attached to this yad. If it's less than a kazayis, there's no yad. When it comes to shemet, he says we can go down to a pearl, to a big bean, like an Egyptian bean, or a bean, and that's less than a kazayis, obviously, and it will have a din of a shemet, and together with other food, you'll have your full kazayis. However, Rabbi Yechonah says no. Rabbi Yechonah says you don't even need a kazayis. For a yad, you can go down to a poil, to a bean, and for a shemer, there's no limit, there's no minimum. Okay, so we asked yesterday a series of questions, and we will continue now with more questions. Says the Gemara here, Daf you test Amar Aleph, we are up to Toshma, 6 lines from the top of the page. Toshma, come in here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says that koilis, this is the thigh bone. Thigh. So you have a little bit of meat over there. So you have a kulis. You have a sheyesh ale kazayis basar. So you have a kulis, a thigh bone that has on it a kazayis of meat. Is goiredes kula letuma. So this opinion of Yehuda says that if you have a kulis, it will then drag the tumah both ways. It will drag the tumah. However. So again, it's only a kazayis, but if the kulis is the bone, the thigh bone with some meat on it, if you have together with some other food items there, together a beya, you will have now, it will pass the tumah on both ways. Now, we don't know yet, we're talking about a yad or we're talking about a shemer, as we'll talk in a minute. And Achedim disagree. They say, I feel yes, you need a minimum, but the minimum is a bean. It will disseminate the tumah, bring the tumah in. Now, let's understand. Are we talking about a yad here? Are we talking about a yad means that there's no real meat, no marrow inside the bone? Or we're talking about here a shemer where there's marrow inside the bone? But Rav, how's he learned this brayse? If we're talking about yad, okay, well, yad, what did Rav say by yad? Yad needs to have a minimum of a kazais. Then if we want to try, as Rashi said on top of the page, to say that these brayses and mishnahs go conform in every opinion conform to the Rav, we're going to have a problem. Kashya Sefer, because the Sefer clearly says as long as you have the size of a bean, it transmits the tumah and brings the tumah in. But you Rav say that no, that a yad needs a minimum of a kazais. So it must be talking about a shemer. But if you have a shemer, then we have a kasha, the reisha, the first opinion. You say that a shemer can be less than a kazais, but you need a minimum of a bean. But in the beginning over here, Rabbi Yehuda says you need a kazais. But you Rav said that a shemer doesn't need a kazais. You said a shemer can be even less than a kazais. So we got a problem. So then Gemara says, So we're going to answer the same way we answered before. You're right. You cannot work out both opinions according to Rav. We're going to say that the Rav can either Yad will follow one opinion or Shem will follow the other opinion. Anybody say maybe Yad, but talking about Yad, who don't Rav Yehuda follows Rav Yehuda that you need a minimum of a kazayis, or Ibai say maybe Shem or Shemer, and he follows the Achedim who say that you need a minimum of a bean. But we got a problem with Rabbi Yechon. Rabbi Yechon holds that if it's a shemer, you don't even need a minimum of bin. But Rabbi Yechon and Amar Kula b'shemer, so he has no choice. He can't say it's yad because he holds the yad doesn't need a kazayis. So Rabbi Yechon say the entire Brais is talking about shemer. I was talking about a shemer. We got a difficulty. How come the Chedim say a minimum of a bean? But who don't got Chedim? He follows the view of Chedim. Fine. He can't. Obviously, Rabbi Yehuda says you need a minimum of a kazayis. Follows up the Chedim. You don't need a kazayis. But if they say you need a minimum of a bean, and Rabbi Yechon said there's no minimum. They say you need a minimum of bean. So he says, I didn't know. He didn't mean specifically a bean. We'll see later in the Gemara, actually, if they were particular about this kipoil. Rabbi Yechon says, he just said it because you gave a share. For the other one, he gave a share as well. But really, you don't need any share whatsoever. And Pearl is a small share, so therefore he threw that in. I need to come at Tanakama Shira, since the Tanakama did give a minimum, come in Namashira, but he didn't mean it. Amar Rava says, Rava, in fact, Posh the Pshat is we're talking about here a shemer, not a yad. They cannot be the b'shemer askin, and we're talking about a shemer. Why? How do you know not talking about a yad? Because a yad and every bone is a yad. Why Dafka specifically talk about a thigh bone, a kailis? The Tony kailis shmama knows that I mean Dafka kailis because it's a shemer, not a yad. Because there's meat over there and there's marrow and so on. It might be learned. Rabbi Chanina says he take it that the pearl is an exact shear. Rabbi Yechon says it's not an exact shear. He just nominated a shear, but you don't read it any shear. Ain't a shear. So when ain't a shear, Vaktani Kapoil. It says Mefedish Kapoil, the size of a bean. I come to the Kamashira, come in Namashira. It didn't mean it. Tashma coming here. It says. From a Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, "Mitahed." Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is mitahed b'shel poil. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says the shemer of a poil is not really a shemer because a poil, if big beans, doesn't need a protective cover. And in fact, even if it has no cover and even if it gets sullied or dirty, it's very easy to wash because they're large beans. So therefore, the idea of a shemer is that it's there to protect it. It doesn't need any protection. So he says a poil has no shemer, and therefore if the shemer becomes tamei, it does not pass it on to the poil. Very good. Or the metame b'shal kidneys. But when it comes to kidneys, which are small beans, like legumes, all that, small kidneys, then it is metame because it's a shemer. And if the shemer comes tame, it passes it on. You do want to have the cover, the tachmish. Now the problem is kidneys are very, very small. And l'chayda, if it's very, very small, how come it's mekabel tumah? How come mekabel tumah is very small? And the Rav said you need a minimum of the size of a large bean, of a poil. And here we're talking about kidneys, which is far smaller than a poil. And it says over here that the shemer acts as a shemer. But according to Rav, a shemer you still need a minimum share of a poil, of a large bean. How's he going to stand the pshat for Blazman Zaya? Does he get more? The says you misunderstood. We're talking about poil. Somewhere else we'll soon see. He said we're talking about the stalk. Or mishum yad, we're not talking about a shemer here surrounding the one bean. We're talking about picking up the stalk that has many, many pods, many sharbitim, and therefore this is a yad for many more than just one little bean, and it'll be more than a kazais. It sounds like we need it to protect it. There's no protection. A yad is not a protector. A yad is just a handle to move it about. So why? So what answers betashmisha doesn't mean protecting. It means to use it. You pick up by the stem, and then you can use it. You can move all the pods. So Tashma, come in here. We learned before when we started the whole Gemara. Where do we learn out the whole concept of shemer? The town of Zerua. So he said the seeds, the way you carry them out together with their husk and their covers. So we see that's where we learn the concept of shemer. And he gives examples. Chita biklipasa, kernel of wheat with its shell, this husk. To oida biklipasa, a barley with its shell. Va'adoshim and lentil, even smaller biklipasa. So see, clearly, you don't need a poil. It's not a large bean. It's much smaller. So we answer beria shiny. Introduce now a new variable here. When do we say that you need the size of a poil if it's small pieces, half pieces? But if it's an entire thing intact, that's a beria. And a barrier is always chashuv. We had this a number of times before already. Okay, boy, Rabbi Isha, another question. Rabbi Isha asked a question on a boya. Ma shnei shemrim ma'u sheyitzarfu. Can you combine two shemrim, two shaychim, so that we can combine them all to the size of a beya? Now the Gemara misunderstood. We thought two layers of shemim, and the Gemara is going to ask, the outer layer no longer serves as a protection, so why would it be considered a shemer? What are we talking about? Two layers. Do we have such a concept? But now we learn. The Buddha said shalosh klippos bebotzel, that three layers when it comes to an onion. Pnimi is the inner layer, like a membrane, which is still really part of, a very thin membrane, which really is part of the onion, is bein shlema, bein kedura. Whether it is whole or whether it is punctured, it makes no difference. It still serves, it's food. It's not really a shemer, it's food, and therefore it doesn't matter. It's considered part of the tumah, and it combines. Mistarefes, emtsoi, the middle one, which already is like a membrane around it, which is not edible. That serves as a shemer. And when does it serve as a shemer? Only if it's whole. Shleima mistarefes. Then if it's whole, it's a shemer, and it's considered, it combines with it to make the tumah. Or we could do the mistarefes. If it's punctured, you cannot combine it. Why? Because it's not really serving a purpose. It's not really protecting. Chitzoina. But the outer one, but the outer membrane is a layer top of a layer. So what's your question here about two shemer? And he's talking about a case over here where you took a piece of food. Let's say you had an egg there, the size of an egg, some food, and you have a shemer on it, and you split them in half. And now they're separate. And the question is, can they combine? For example, two half onions or two small onions. And he explains. The question is, the shemer for this one, not a shemer for this one, this one, not a shemer for this one. Therefore, even if they're touching, they cannot combine one because this shemer has nothing to do with the other half. I didn't keep the high mega of the day, but high mega says each one serves the purpose of a shemer, even though I'm only minding this, protecting only this half. You put the other half, they combine. Toshma coming here. Rabbi Elazar Metaye Bishop Poil. We just had before. Rabbi Elazar says a poil has no shemer because it's a large bean. It doesn't need any protection. Umetame Bishop kidneys. But when it comes to kidneys, it comes to small little legumes or small little kidneys. He says that what there it serves as a protection. Because you actually want it as a protection. You want it as a protection. so it sounds like they're all very, very small. So it must be a number of pods combined together. Now, each pod has their own protector, the pod itself, and there's some kidneys inside. But each one is very, very small, and they all combine together. So we see that the shemer, even though I'm only shemer for this Shabbat and you're shemer for that Shabbat, they all combine. They all combine. So the Gemara. And even though the shemer for this Shabbat is not a shemer for the next Shabbat, says the Gemara, no, you think we're talking about a number of Shabbatin and they just combine. No, this is what we mentioned before. We're talking about over here, the stem, umishum yad. We're talking here, but not about shemer. We're talking about over here of the yad. So we're talking about over here of the kulcha. We're talking about over here where it's the stem itself that has a number of pods attached to it, and with the stem you move it about. So therefore, think out for all of them. What do you mean protected? It doesn't mean protected. It means tashmishon. It gives me ability to use it. The Rabbi Shmuel said, "I'll call Toshma. Come in here." Rabbi Shmuel said again. We're going to bring this. We're going to bring this brayso. I'll call that a zerua kedera shebnei adam might see, and like people normally carry it out. Chita beklipasa, besoida beklipasa, badoshim beklipasa, and all of them in with their shells. And the Lefeda over there, they're all small. You have to combine. So we answer Kedam bekulcha umshumyat hachanami over here too b'shedra umshum. Just like you said before, we're talking about by the beans, we're talking about by the kidneys, we're talking about a stem with a bunch of pods. So over here also we're talking about the shedra. We are talking about over here, let's say by the wheat, we're talking about the spine, and it's because of a shayman that this one spine has a whole bunch of different wheat kernels, separate things, and they're all part of the same spine. And they're all lined up on top of each other, and they all now are sort of in a way together, because if you pull a couple of seed kernels out, the other ones will fall down. We're saying about it. What do you mean? Bishleim Eliasa, the bean, the wheat kernels on top. Tzricha letatisa needs the wheat kernels on the bottom. If we pull them out, they'll all fall down. So therefore, there's a shame in it. Elatatios, but the ones on the bottom don't need the ones on top. My tzricha leilasa. What are the ones on top for? So therefore, how do they combine and say there's a shame for all of them? Each one is disparate. Bechad Dora. We're actually talking about they're all in the same row and they're very tight. If you pull one out, they'll all fall, the big gaps, and they'll fall down. So you want to make a beya, where do you find such a large quantity? It should be a beya in one row. Says the Gemara, yes, there's a miracle. The wheat of Shimon Meshatach, which was miraculously very, very large in that generation, and therefore they were able, it's hypothetical, at least, or in those times, they were able to have such large kernels of wheat. Says the Gemara, and now they're introducing the idea that this possibility of such large kernels of wheat is forget about just having a row. We can even have one bean, one kernel of wheat could be the size of a beya. A gufa, we learned a few days ago, we learned you have two bones. And each bone only has a half a kazayis. And we said that you need a kazayis inside a room to be an oil as and their tame, they spread the tumah throughout the entire interior of the room. But what's inside the room? The hechner shein. You only brought in the bone, not the meat. And each one's only half a kazayis. And the Tanakhama says they combine to a kazayis, and now it generates tumah. The entire house is tummy. Now, but each piece of meat only has a half a kazayis, a bone. So we actually asked yesterday a question on Rav from it. You, Rav, said that when it comes to yad, a handle, you need a minimum of a kazayis. And here we see that you have less than a kazayis. So we said that Rav only follows one of the opinions. Rav will follow the opinion of Yehuda ben Nekusa. How can you combine the two kazayis? And Rav will follow that opinion. Or we said that Rav has said we're talking about a bone that has a marrow inside it, so therefore it's a shemer. And the shemer doesn't need a kazayis, even less than a kazayis. Amar Shlakish said now because the machlekes, so the Shlakish said makes a comment. Lo yishanu ela etzim. We're talking about only the bone is considered a handle. The have the yad as a yad. Aval nimel have a yad. The hairs, if there are any hairs sticking out, that's not considered a yad because you don't really pull the bone, the meat out with the hair, so it's not really a yad. But what it is it's a shemer. It is a shemer. Because it does protect a little bit whatever's under the hair. The only thing is, as a shayma, even though there's a chumrah now, because you can count that in the size of the beya, but the kula is that only the meat is touching the hair. Do we say, the meat connected? Otherwise, it doesn't become tummy. Not like a yad, you just pull the handle and everything that drags with it becomes tummy. But Rabbi Yechon, even here is a yad. It says, if you have hide that has on it a kazayis of meat, and if you touch one of the strings of the meat extending from it, or or a hair opposite the meat, tummy is tummy. Now, here, what is it? My lamashum yad. Here is yad. We see clearly here is yad. So the Shlokish answered, "Lo mishum shaymer." No, here is shaymer. Like I said before, he holds that here is a shaymer, and that's why you pass the tumah. Fedi moramika shaymer, lagabe shaymer. The hide is the highlight is a shaymer, and the hair is the top of the hide. How can there be a second layer? We just said before, there's no second layer. So we answered the hair, actually the hair follicles makes holes in the hide, so therefore the hair is directly touching the meat. It's not a layer on top of a layer. So if you tell me that hairs create holes in the hide, got a problem. Hey, tefillin, heiche kasvinan, how can you write tefillin on parchment that's full of holes? You need a complete writing, complete writing. The leka, you don't have it. Says the Gemara, you forgot how they say in Israel, in the West, called nekev shadya, oil of any puncture that is so minuscule that you can write, you won't even, and depending on what it is, and just writes, ain't a nekev is not considered a puncture. Or Ibai say another answer. Yad, that everything here, I said it's a shame. No, it's a yad. It is a yad. In this case, it's a yad. Shlokish said that a hair is not a yad. Rabbi said elsewhere, we'll see later where Rabbi said it. Rabbi said elsewhere, he said it, what? We're talking about wheat by the stalks, amongst many other, wheat that's attached to it. We're talking about a whole bunch of hairs, and therefore with a whole bunch of hairs, you can pull it and yank it out. Then it's a yad. An individual hair is not a yad. Says the Gemara. What's this Rabbi you said over there about the Meloye? Okay, aha, Meloye Shibishibolim. He said that if you have over there by the Shibolim the stalks of grain, and you have there a whole bunch of rows around them or rings around them, is mitamin umetamin. They combine, they're part of it, and they accept tumah, they tumah the einam mitzdarfin, but they don't combine. They're considered part of the grain. It's considered like a yad. Right? Since we say it doesn't combine to make the full shear, it means it's only a yad. Now, a yad, as soon as you pull the ring, it falls right off. What kind of yad is it? We're talking about as a whole. We're talking about a very tall one, and therefore that or the way on top, and therefore it's you can it's much stronger. And you pull a whole bunch of them to there, you can pull them all together. That's one language. Lishachin is another version. There's another version. That really the second version of the Shlaki was talking about lots of hairs, and even lots of hairs. The Shlaki says it's not a yad, it's a shomer. So then we ask a question. It seems over here that hair is a yad, and he says no, it's a shomer. And I'll prove it to you. In fact, when it says over here, okay, the string of meat, that's a yad, but the hair, talking about a shayman, I'll prove it to you. The shayman. Could you say yad of the hair because the yad nima achaz. What can you do with one hair? So it must be talking about it's a shayman because remember the hair follicles they go all the way down to the meat and they protect the meat underneath that hair. But the yad it can't be. How can a single hair be a yad? So that's what Reish Lakish is proving that it's a shayman. That's not a kasha. You want to could be talking about a yad. What can you do with one hair? We're talking about many hairs, and therefore you can yank the hairs and pull whatever it is you're pulling. Where did he mention his din? How now we learned those rings of kernels of wheat, they become tummy. They pass from of aim and starfin, they don't combine, which means it's only a yad, it's not a shaymer. What can you do with it? If as soon as you pull it, it falls down, all the kernels and the wheat fall down. There's a whole bunch of them there. However, there's another version. Others learn that the Machlekes, the Shlokish and B'Yechon was actually a comment in our Mishnah. Amas this about Mishnah, ha'oid v'ha'roitiv v'hakifa mitzdarfin. They all combine the tamei tumas eichel. They all combine. It says in our Mishnah that the oil, the hide, and the roitiv is like the soup, and the kifa are the pieces of meat. And what they all combine to metame tumas eichel. And we include over there also bones. Now, l'chayda bone could either be a shomer if there's marrow inside, or a yad with no marrow. So he says over here, since it says mitztarfin that they can be used, and the aggregate gives the share. So obviously, we're not talking about yad here because yad does not mitztarfin. We're talking about shomer. So what are we talking about? Ela etzim talking about a bone. To have a shamer. A bone is a shamer. Talking about this marrow. Avol nima, but here lo have a shamer. Here is not a shamer at all. So here it says he's not a shamer. Why isn't a shamer? So right now we think because you can't have two layers. The hair is on top of the hide. Rabbi Yechon have a shamer. Rabbi Yechon says no. The hair can also be a shamer. How can you have two rows? So he said yes. Similar to the before, but a little different, a little opposite. The hair can go right through the skin, touching the meat. So therefore, it's a shomer. It's not a second layer. How can you write? It has to be a whole writing. The leka that we don't have it. You forgot what is said in the West. Over all of any puncture that the ink goes right over it, and your neck is not a hole. Or we just learned the Braisa. We're just repeating the question on this version here. Oid hide olav kazayis basar hide that has a kazayis of meat. If you touch the meat that's running, or hayatzim that comes out of it, or ubeside or shekeneg the hair that's right opposite the meat, tame is tame. My love, mishum shomer. We're talking here about shomer, so we see that there is a shomer. You said there's no shomer behavior the second layer. You see clearly that here is a shomer. And why do I think it's talking about a shomer there before we thought it was talking about I don't think it's talking about shomer because it says the meat opposite it. That only by shomer you need that the meat should be opposite. But it says no, mishum yad. Says the Gemara, Yad, Nima Achaz Machaz. If it is Yudish Luck is maintained that it's a Yad, not a Shema, what can one single hair do? We're talking about there's a whole bunch of hairs. The Heich even Rabbaloi, we're just repeating it. What Rabbaloi says, that there are again those stalks and the wheat, the kernels in the stalks. They receive tumah and they give off tumah the aim and starfin and they don't combine. So talking about Yad. What can you do with those kernels of wheat? A whole bunch of them there for the we'll stop over there, continue tomorrow in Yitz Hashem.